Transit and Bus Committee meeting. Mr. Marino, are there any members of the public who are registered and wish to speak?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We have 7 public speakers registered this morning. I would like to remind each speaker they have 2 minutes to speak. The first speaker is Jason Pinheiro.
Good morning on my 31st birthday. David Jones, pay attention, please. Thank you. A couple of things I want to bring this month. First of all, Dr. Eric, one question on my birthday. What are you going to do with the massive delays that we're having on the subways? And especially on late nights that the D train runs so slow between 34th Street, Herald Square, and West 4th Street. Second of all, what are you guys going to do with our subway system? It's falling into pieces. But I'm in favor of all the proposals presented, especially the one regarding the M1, but I would like to that the M101 and 102 be extended as well, because the M103 wants like a slow turtle. And Freddie, I hope that you keep your promise that you did last month regarding accessory, because I'm seeing way more commuters using accessory than ever before. I hope that you keep that promise. And enjoy your day, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Pinheiro. The next speaker is Howard Birnbaum. Mr. Birnbaum will be followed by Liz Patrick.
Good morning. I'm here today to be less than 2 minutes. On the Q23 and the QM12 and the 482, the layover they want to put is by shopping stop. If you put it by shopping stop, it would be dangerous because there's a traffic light in that corner, and I was wondering if you could put the layover by the DD Bank on the corner of 71st and Metro instead of shopping stop for safety reasons. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum. The next speaker is Liz Patrick. Ms. Patrick will be followed by David Paul Gerber.
Hello, I'm Liz Patrick, East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association. I'd like to start off by thanking Stephanie Bogard for helping us with the problem I raised last month. We had a temporary bus stop for the M15 local that was had poor signage, and the bus drivers didn't know to stop for our passengers. So we really appreciate getting that straightened out. Today I'm here to ask your help with another problem, and that could be characterized as bus spacing for the M15 local. I'd like to share with you a couple of the observations from a recent survey we conducted from May 17th to May 24th and recommend 2 actions that I hope will improve the reliability of the local bus service there. Our volunteers documented bus arrival times and bus numbers for the M15 local bus, and we also noticed the same information for the select buses, the M15 Select, passing by our 72nd Street stop. We surveyed 3 times of the day. The first was 7:30 to 8:30, then 12 noon to 1, and 5 to 6 p.m. On average, we noticed there are 6 local buses coming every hour, which is great. However, their bus spacing is very erratic and leads to frustration on the part of the passengers waiting, especially given the high volume of select buses they see going by. On average, there are 2 to 3 select buses for every M15 local in the morning and evening rush hour, and 1 to 1.5 at noontime. What surprised us most over the course of the week is we observed approximately 25% of all M15 local bus riders waiting at the stop, leaving because they weren't sure when the bus was going to arrive. Our worst example was cited on Friday, May 19th from 5 to 6 p.m. on 2nd Avenue, where 27 people boarded and 20 left. We have two suggestions we're hoping you'll consider. One, can you have the 6 buses that come every hour be spaced every 10 minutes if possible? And two, can you add the bus time app information to our M15 local bus shelter so people know that even if it's running late, they know when it's coming? Thank you.
The next speaker is David Paul Gerber, and Mr. Gerber will be followed by Murray Bowden.
Happy belated Father's Day, everyone here in the room. Talk about quickly 3 items, very quick. The M1 extension. Why not consider going to Park Road, down Broadway, up Park Road, back up Center Street? Grand Street is like in the middle of nowhere. It's not much. It's a long ride, subway ride itself. Secondly, the BX6 Select Bus Service. That's a good route. However, it's going to have reliability issues, especially during baseball games as it crosses the Macomb Downs Bridge and across 161st Street. Should possible a exclusive bus lane be installed at 161st Street so the buses can zip right through the traffic? It'd be very difficult to put it on the bridge because of the merge. But just something to consider working with New York City DOT about this. And speaking of working with New York City DOT, there's something else that I would like to address. It's not on the agenda. I do apologize for it. It's in regards to the abuse of New York City property used for personal vehicles to snare illegal parking. Specifically, New York City. I see New York City Transit vests and various placards supposedly issued by New York City Transit. Some may be real, some may be forged. They park at metered locations. They park where there's no parking. If they park at metered locations, it robs the city of revenue, drives businesses away because people won't look for parking, erodes the city's quality of life. So, seriously, there should be a task force with the NYPD in collaboration with them, as well as New York City Department of Transportation. In fact, I posted a video on YouTube under Brighton EXP David and asked the 2 agents to summons a vehicle that had a New York City Transit vest up by Bainbridge and 205th. They left an empty envelope as if they tried to trick me about that. And the placard abuse has been so rampant over the years. Mr. Mulder in 2012 should know that.
Thank you, Mr. Gerber. The next speaker is Murray Bowden. Mr. Bowden will be followed by Eric Mayo.
I want to thank the Transit Authority for making these new please offer me a seat courtesies as a senior citizens. There are times now when I find I need them. A couple of weeks ago, I met with John Degnan, who is the chair of the Port Authority, over the issue of the bus garage and the Secaucus station. A number of people have expressed the desire to have the number 7 line extended to Secaucus, and that become the transfer point for many of those buses that come into the Port Authority terminal. That would reduce the complexity of rebuilding the terminal and permit an enormous advance in environmental issues, because you wouldn't be bringing hundreds of buses into New York City unnecessarily. Certainly some of the buses would come, but the majority of the buses would go to transit at Secaucus, where there is space to store the buses and not have to move them back and forth twice a day. John and I, and his chief of staff, met for an hour. We disagree, but the point I made at the meeting this week was that John and I both have more in common than we thought. We're of a different generation. We think differently. And we have to pass the baton to the younger generation. The first meeting this morning, I spoke about the collision between the tanker and the destroyer, operating under rules that were established 50 or 100 years ago. Around here, you're still buying over-the-road commuter buses that go from here to California and using them for commuter buses. Long-distance buses, you might just as well use low-floor buses, which load much faster. Yes, I see that. Thank you. I have just a few more comments. Low-floor buses would make it much easier. Megabus drives those buses from here to Boston, Washington, and all over. They manage to have double-decker buses. With the technology of locating GPS, you can now assign those buses to go in places where they can go. You no longer have to have one uniform bus for everything else. So moving and promoting the number 7 line to Secaucus should be high on your agenda. Many, many people have advocated it. The former vice chair of the Port Authority is now made it speaks about it many, many different places. And there needs to be more action on it. And I, again, want to thank you for this. I don't have a baby on board, but I do have a different problem.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. The next speaker is Eric Mayo, and Mr. Mayo is representing State Senator Daniel Squadron.
My name is Eric Mayo, and I am the Director of Operations for State Senator Daniel Squadron. Thank you to the committee today for the opportunity to speak regarding the M1 extension. Extending the M1 downtown is great news for those in Lower Manhattan and everyone who needs another bus to get downtown. The 1.5-mile extension south of 8th Street has been underserved since 2010, and there's been limited north-southbound service on the west side since. For 2 years, our office has been working with Community Board 2 and the MTA on solutions that can help link Lower Manhattan to the South Village and beyond. Today is a new milestone in that push. I also want to spend a couple moments highlighting the importance of extending the M1 down Broadway. This will provide much-needed additional southbound service on the west side of Manhattan and get residents of Soho and the South Village closer to the courts and other important services downtown. Thank you to the MTA for considering this extension, and to New York City Transit as well as Community Board 2 for their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next and last speaker is Jake Kinzelberg.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm here to discuss the current state of our subway system and a solution to that. I'm a New Yorker. I'm from Long Island. I take the Long Island Railroad and the subway system on a daily basis. Different routes all the time. But you know, regularly I'm riddled with mechanical issues, electrical issues, track work, significant malfunctions, and ultimately it takes a toll on not only me but everyone who's commuting. So in keeping up with the MTA's efforts to provide safe and reliable service to riders, I offer my expertise in the context of big data, more specifically in-memory computing, which will integrate signal systems, subway cars, and increase connectivity in subway tunnels. So I'm sure that no one really understands to a very, very technical degree what this would do, but essentially it would be the implementation of many different little sensors. Yeah.
Would you please speak more directly into the mic so we can all hear you?
Yeah. So by implementing sensors per yard of track, per foot of track, whatever it may be, we'd be sending that information, whether it's payload, the time of the day, the frequency of the train cars passing, all into an internal in-memory data grid, which would process all that information in real time, and it would make predictive analysis using it. It could save money in terms of maintenance costs. It could make peak trains function quicker and more effective. There are so many things that we could do with this technology. And over the course of the last 6 weeks or so, I've been trying to engage different levels of the MTA, which is how I ended up here. I also heard about the Genius Challenge that Governor Cuomo put forward, and I thought that this is definitely the best place to see if there is some kind of fit for that. And if so, dive deeper in a different place, in a different setting with a different audience. It could be things like alerting people seamlessly on the app, telling them, okay, this train is going to be delayed. You should take this route. And using that information and seeing where people are traveling on those, it will also help us on our end say, okay, this is what people are doing, and this is how we should proceed. It's a lot more than 2 minutes, but I gave some collateral so you guys could take a look at it, and I'd appreciate any kind of pointing in the right direction so that I can speak to the right guys about this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That is the last speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. The minutes from the May meeting have been distributed in the committee book. May I have a motion to approve? Is there a second? Are there any changes, any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? The minutes are accepted. Are there any changes to the work plan?
There are no changes to the work plan.
Then I'll ask Acting President Irick to make his opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. As you are aware, on Monday, June 12th, the MTA announced that it will implement a comprehensive transportation plan to allow Amtrak to perform emergency repair and construction on its tracks at Penn Station. Beginning July 10th and continuing until September 1st, Long Island Railroad will operate fewer trains into Penn Station. During this period, New York City Transit will accommodate and provide additional options for LIRR customers. Steve Vidal will provide details of the bus plan, which includes a bus network providing service for Long Island Railroad customers and to and from Midtown Manhattan. In addition, in the AM peak, New York City subways will cross on a Long Island Railroad monthly and weekly tickets at Hunters Point, Atlantic Terminal, and Jamaica, and will have staff available at these locations to assist customers and help ensure smooth operations despite the anticipated increase in riders at these transfer points. While this is a monumental undertaking for all parties involved, I can confidently say every effort is being made to mitigate the impact on our commuters. Lastly, customers can go to the MTA website for additional details on alternative services. During the same period, New York City Transit also has a major construction project. On July 1st, New York City Transit will begin a 10-month project to replace the 104-year-old Myrtle Viaduct used by the M train. During this period, portions of the M line will be shut down and shuttle bus service will be provided. This work must be completed before we begin the Sandy repairs to the Canarsie Tunnel, the vital under-river link between Manhattan and Brooklyn, that will start April of 2019. During the Canarsie tube work, the M will become a key travel alternative for L riders, so it is critical that these repairs are made to the M. Steve will also talk about the bus service there. Also, on a positive note, I'm happy to inform you that the South Ferry Station on the number 1 line is scheduled to reopen by the end of this month. This 31-month project, completed on time, involved extensive repair, reconstruction, and resiliency work, finally resolving the damage caused by Superstorm Sandy. Thank you.
Thanks, Darrell, for the report. You mentioned weekly and monthly commutation tickets can be used at Atlantic Terminal, Jamaica, and Hunters Point. They cannot be used at Woodside, for instance, or East New York, if somebody wanted to change there to the railroad or to the subway? Just those 3 places?
Right, just those 3 places, which are the stations most likely for diverted customers to go to, and where we have some additional capacity on trains to accommodate them.
That's going to be made very clear to riders, I assume.
Yes.
I understand that since CBTC will not be live yet on the 7 line, that you're going to short-turn trains to provide extra capacity. Do you yet know where you're going to short-turn them?
The intent on the 7 line is to short-turn the train. And it's actually not short-turning. We're providing an extra train at Hunters Point to accommodate.
It will go into service at Hunters Point?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Merdler.
Darrell, is it clear that you cannot defer the work on the M line occurring at the same time as we have the Summer from Hell? In other words, can it be moved to September?
I don't think that would be prudent. I mean, this work is critical. We've taken every step to get it done as quickly as possible, but as I mentioned in my comments, this is like a prerequisite to the Canarsie work. So I would say no.
All right, because the people, you're going to have a whole range of problems, and I'm wondering whether there's some way of mitigating it by just postponing it a little bit.
Can I just add, they need to do this work so that they can get to the L train work, and then we have work we're doing on the upper deck of the Queensboro Bridge, and we're now waiting for the L train work. There's a whole series of things that are that need to happen. So I think at this point, I'm talking between the two agencies, it's very hard to move any of these schedules.
Absolutely. Thank you, Polly.
If there's no one else, then I'll ask Winton Habersham to take on the transit operations report.
Good morning. As you know, we are working hard in transit to reduce delays and improve service every day. We are working diligently to implement the 6-point plan that Interim Director Hakem laid out a few weeks ago. However, I'd like to start by addressing something that did not go so well, the June 5th Broadway Lafayette F-train incident. That event is not at all reflective of the kind of service the subway's team works to provide. The incident began with a southbound F train experiencing a malfunction of the components that provide power to the train car. While our cars are designed with redundancy to provide uninterrupted power, in this case, several backup systems failed as well. This caused a loss of power that stalled the train and affected air conditioning systems as well. The root cause of the failures remains under investigation. We are undertaking a thorough analysis of the equipment. We're also looking at the entire R46 fleet to determine if there are any similar issues. The duration of the incident from the time of the stall until passengers exited the train at the station was approximately 48 minutes. In terms of Subway's response to the incident, a service delivery supervisor and a road car inspector were on the disabled train in approximately 10 minutes. All trains, but the one directly behind the affected train, were successfully rerouted. Within 30 minutes after the train stalled, the supervisor, the road car inspector, and the train crew established a means to move the train into the station despite that power component problem. Once they were in the station, that is Broadway Lafayette, there was a 2 to 3 minute delay in opening the doors while the supervisor and the RCC, our Rail Control Center, ensured that passengers from both the disabled train and the train behind it would be able to expeditiously disembark. While announcements were made both on the train and in the affected stations during the incident, this messaging did not meet the needs of our customers. We are moving to improve communications with passengers both on a regular basis and in the case of an incident. In doing so, we are eliminating many of the repeat recorded announcements and are making greater use of live announcements from the train crew themselves. We're also shifting responsibility from the conductor to the train operator for the initial announcement made at the time a train stops outside of a station. We're doing that because the train operator is at the front of the train, obviously, and is really in the best position to see and describe the situation to the passengers. We remain committed to giving customers updates as information becomes available. Improved communication is essential to not only those aboard the train, but also those waiting on the platforms and those planning their commute as well. This is not a proud moment for us, and we are working to do everything in our power to understand what happened and to take corrective action. We and our customers expect better, and I wanted to personally assure you that we understand and we are working to make improvements. I'd like to now give you an update on the accomplishments so far on the 6-point plan rolling out on the 8th Avenue corridor. As you may recall from the announcement last month and the information shared at the May TA committee meeting, this effort is intended to improve subway performance and the customer experience. Subway cars have received pre-summer season HVAC maintenance, that is the air conditioning, to minimize failure of the air conditioning systems. We've also launched a new mid-season HVAC maintenance initiative to bolster the pre-season efforts. This work has begun and completion is anticipated by mid-August. We are addressing key causes of door failures by replacing limit switches and fixing leaky roofs. 15% of the R32 fleet is complete. We are on track to deploy additional car equipment emergency response teams by July 1st. A comprehensive cross-functional signals, track, third rail, and infrastructure inspection and defect identification team has reviewed nearly half of over 700 signal and switch locations, and defect elimination plans have been initiated. Employee seniority-based job selections are in place to staff 4 additional track and signals emergency response teams, also known as CAT teams, by July 1st. Bi-weekly ultrasonic or UT rail testing has begun on the 8th Avenue corridor, and a portable UT testing pilot is being arranged as well. Staff is in place for more frequent right-of-way track cleaning. An existing contract has been modified to allow the placement of EMTs at 5 locations during the AM and PM peak service to provide a faster response to sick customers. We anticipate rollout of this initiative in July. Service ambassadors have been deployed at 34th Street and Penn Station, and hiring is underway for the remaining positions. An alternative tower operation was recently launched to control the interlockings around 149th Street and Grand Concourse in an effort to reduce the bottlenecks. Now, we know that that's not specifically on the 8th Avenue corridor, but we identified that as a good opportunity as well to improve service through 149th Street and thus serve the Lexington corridor as well as the West Side IRT better. We are pleased with the progress on the 8th Avenue corridor initiative so far and look forward to keeping you informed on these efforts at future meetings. This concludes our operating report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Havisham. Are there any comments or questions? Ms. Vanterpool, then Mr. Jones, then Mr. Albert.
Thank you for the update on the efforts that Subways is undertaking to address a lot of these issues, specifically addressing the F-train incident. And I would imagine that these updates will be a regular part of your reporting each month. There are two analyses were released last week that I think are very important to the discussion of Subways. Not only are they directly related to the Subways and investment, but they talk about capital program investment more broadly. One was an analysis commissioned by a Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer of the Independent Budget Office, talking about the signal and communication work being done by the MTA. The second was issued by the Citizens Budget Commission with an analysis from their perspective on the priorities of the existing capital program and the capital program amendment. We certainly are not going to reopen and revisit that. The board has made a decision on the capital program amendment. It has moved forward. 2 board members, myself being one, voted against it, but it is now under the decision-making purview of the Capital Program Review Board. So I don't want to necessarily revisit the CBC's analyses. However, I do want to point something out from the 20-year needs assessment, which, as you all know, because you've worked on it, was prepared beginning in 2011, released in 2013 to inform the subsequent capital programs. And while the New York City Transit portion of the capital program is very much aligned with what was suggested in the 20-year needs assessment in terms of dollar for dollar amount. It's 16.3. The 20-year needs assessment talked about 16.2 investment for New York City Transit broadly. I have noticed a discrepancy with regards to signals and communications and the investment that was made. And if my understanding of it is correct, we are actually investing $1 billion less in signals than what is suggested in the 20-year needs assessment. The 20-year needs assessment singled out signals for a $3.05 billion investment in the 15 to 19 program. And when I've broken down the numbers in the capital program amendment and this most recent capital program, it looks as if we're spending $2.03 billion on signals and $696 million on communications. So again, that's nearly a $1 billion shortfall from what was suggested in the 20-year needs assessment and about a $250 million shortfall for what was suggested in the communications area. And there is tremendous effort and attention and time that you all put into developing the 20-year needs assessment. And the next 20-year needs assessment, or well, rather, the next capital program for the 2020-2024 cycle suggests that we invest $3.8 billion just in signals alone. So as we're thinking about the next capital program, we have to make sure we're not investing any less than what is noted in the 20-year needs assessment. We have to really adequately reflect that needs assessment because it is talking about the needs of our system. In fact, it points out that of the mainline signals and communications, 26% of our signals are backlogged, and I'm telling you all things you know. 28% of our communications projects are backlogged and are due for investment. So I bring this up because all of us are incredibly aware of the delays that we're all experiencing. And I recognize there's a whole host of ideas on the table and options that are being pursued. My question to you is, what do you need in the ways of personnel or other resources to accomplish some of these goals? Because we spent a good deal of time talking about technology, particularly around the Genius competition. We've also spent a good deal talking about capital needs with regards to rolling stock. What resources do you need, if any, on the personnel staff side to accelerate and expedite some of these improvements? And then secondly, it seems as if we need to start moving toward an expanded fast-track program. And the public, understandably, we're all very frustrated. We would love to see these delays happen a lot quicker. Is there a discussion about expanding the fast-track program and just really cutting down on the time and increasing track access for a lot of these projects?
If I may, it's a lot there. Yes. Okay. With respect to resources and personnel, the larger projects, the signal modernization projects, are by and large performed by the contractors. And with respect to resources, track access obviously is one of the larger constraints. You know, it's very difficult to have two contracts going at the same time. It's very difficult to provide the adequate amount of track access to the contractors. We've made some strides, I think, in that regard. The 6th Avenue corridor shutdown earlier this year is an example of that. Fast track in general is an example of that as well, and that's more so on the maintenance side. So certainly, the use, providing of better track access to the contractors is something that we need to continue to look at and to continue to improve, while at the same time minimizing the impact, obviously, on our riders and our customers. With respect to other resources, our in-house resources, especially on the signal side, it is difficult to provide maintainers and to create, if you will, a maintainer by way of training and the like. It is a very, very serious position. It's a safety-sensitive position, and so we do not take their training lightly. But at the same time, we do want to look at opportunities to see if we can get them through that pipeline more quickly. That said, and the reason why that's valuable is because there are some signal projects that we've performed over the years that have been done by in-house personnel as a way to augment the major projects, the major signal improvement projects, modernization projects that are done by the contractors. A few of them have been the control line extensions, stop cable projects that we've done in the past. We have a project called the AC to DC line conversion that's going from AC line control to DC line control. That has been done by in-house forces. So, yeah, personnel is something that we have to pay attention to, even to augment the bigger capital projects, signal projects.
Yeah. A couple of issues, and I'll start with the signals issue. There was a recent article that I've shared with some members of the staff and board in City Limits, raising questions about Siemens, one of the contractors, having been engaged in underwriting the very study that they led to ultimately them being awarded a contract. I'm more interested in the issue of what is the oversight over the contractor. Is the pace of signal installation which has already been missing some of the deadlines? Are there some penalties for that? And is there any way to accelerate the process? I'll send you the article. It was of concern. I think Mr. Myrtler and others have raised questions about sole source contracting, but this raised other questions. So I'd be interested, I'll send you that article, but I didn't be interested, are we going to be stuck? I think I heard at some point, 2050 before we're finished. I don't think the public are going to tolerate that because we'll have, incredible problems going forward. As a second line, and this actually is Mr. Myrtler's idea when I first got on the board, I know when Ronnie Hagum and you have mentioned that there was an examination of safety barriers at stations. It's been used to other parts of the world. I understand the expense, but I'm now being concerned and confronted by members of my staff and others of certain station overcrowding that makes people fear for their lives, because when a train gets backed up, suddenly the platform is so filled with people that the fear of being accidentally pushed into the tracks is something that's of issue. And this is two things. First of all, I think this may be a prime opportunity for public-private venture kind of stuff. Obviously, certain of the big corporations which have employees coming in would love to have their names on big posters or whatever, saying, we brought you this safety device, and perhaps pairing it. But I'm interested in two things. What has the examination of that been in past? I know you've done some work. And secondly, where are the stations where this becomes a high risk? This doesn't have to be system-wide, but clearly there's some unique stations where you find platform overcrowding that's a literal threat to life and limb. Thank you.
John, would you? I'm going to start with the platform. I'm going to start with the platform screen doors first, all right? Because that's freshest in my memory. Sorry. With regards to that, we had reported previously that we're on the verge of kicking off a system-wide study. So that part is underway. We also are focusing that effort to see if there is a station on the Canarsie line where it would make the most sense initially for an initial implementation. It's a little premature to say that that's going to happen as much as we're looking into it. So the platform screen door issue is being taken very seriously and is being looked at in all due diligence. We also are prioritizing the list, as you suggested, of the most crowded stations and where the most incidents are. With regards to the specific issues that you asked about Siemens, I have not personally read the article, and that's not a diversion of the issue. Contractor oversight remains on every single project, though. Specific New York City Transit oversight does exist, and we have oversight of our own oversight. So I will look at that article and see what the relevance is to the way we conduct our management of the contractors and see if, in effect, we need to improve anything. With regards to the pace of installation, that is all being looked at very significantly right now. I'm not sure what particular project you're referring to. We are aggressively managing the current flushing line project. And yes, that project is late, but that also is late for reasons. In other words, there's been a lot of issues associated with the flushing line contract. Some of them being caused by, as an example, Hurricane Sandy, which basically did throw us off a good period of time during the course of that project. So there's things that you don't like to point back to as an excuse, but when they impact you for many, many months and it kind of manifests itself at the end of a project, you know, you have to basically make sure folks remember some of those things that occurred. But again, I can get into specifics on flushing line with you separately, and so that you're comfortable, or so that all are comfortable with the pace of advancing that project.
In the case of the F train at Broadway Lafayette, I understand the train's been shopped and you're trying to find out what happened to it. But if power is lost and backup power on an R40 or any car is lost, is it then protocol for the conductor to go car to car to make announcements, or are they supposed to stay in their post? Otherwise, how would passengers know what was going on if both power systems failed?
Yeah, circumstances vary. You know, the response varies by the circumstance, Commissioner. In that particular instance, as we mentioned, the supervisor boarded the train within 10 minutes. When they boarded the train, the supervisor reports to us that they heard the conductor making the announcements. And so the supervisor then went into the mode, if you will, of trying to restore power to that train, or to at least be able to move that train once they heard the announcements. But generally, that incident responder, that supervisor, has the role. Part of their role is to go through the train and engage the customers and see if everyone is okay. To give them a sense of...
Not the conductor, the supervisor.
That's correct. With a situation like that, that's not unusual for a supervisor to do that. The point that I think that merits emphasis is that we want to be able to communicate to everyone aboard that train as effectively as possible, whether it be the train operator, the conductor, or the supervisor. And what we did see, what the supervisor does report, is that when they did board the train, the conductor was making that announcement. Like I said, we think there's some opportunity for growth and some opportunity for improvement there, and we're going ahead and making those changes.
Okay, a couple of questions on the new initiative, the 5-point, because it really is 5-point, not 6-point at this point. But the list of stations along the 8th Avenue corridor does not include Spring Street. Was that deliberate or just an oversight? It lists every station from 125th Street to Fulton Street, with the exception of Spring Street.
I have to look at that. That may have been an oversight. Certainly, Spring Street is included.
I would have thought so.
Sure.
On the emergency medical personnel that'll be stationed at 5 points, are they allowed to leave those stations and go to an adjacent station if there is a sick passenger, or they must remain at those 5 points?
So we are still developing what we're calling the ConOps, the concept of operations. Principally, yes, they will be able to leave a point and go to the train. This is really all about expediting.
So if one is stationed at 14th Street and a sick passenger occurs at 23rd Street, they are allowed to go there?
Absolutely. Sure.
There may be even a roving component to this.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Thought it was stationed at 5 places, but they can rove.
Yeah, so like Winston said, the ConOps is still being developed. What's going to work best for our customers will be what we do.
Mr. Berger. Mr. Havisham, I understand that a major reason that the signal problem exists lies as much in the cables or the wiring communicating between the signals and along the track. Is that correct?
With respect to the cables, and again, I presume you're talking about the much older cables, the
Correct.
Original cables. My concern, and our engineering folks and our operating folks' concern with those cables is not so much with the reliability, but their sheer age. They're the type of cables that require a great deal amount of not just maintenance, but safety checks. We have to do a lot of work to make sure that those cables are functioning and that they can't create a situation that becomes unsafe. And so that's where the focus. We don't generally have a universal failure of those signal cables, but we give a lot of attention to them to prevent an unsafe failure of those cables.
It is my understanding that many of those cables, which as you say are quite old, are wrapped, they have asbestos, and they have concerns on a variety of levels. And my question is, to the extent they are a problem, has there been any examination as to whether there would be a benefit in bypassing the existing cabling system and putting in brand new fiber optic or other cabling rather than replacing or removing the existing cables? Because if you remove them, you're going to have some significant asbestos remediation problems.
Appreciate that point, Commissioner. And we have taken measures where practical to do that. The cables that are of most concern to us are those that are connected to the older signal apparatus, the stop mechanisms, the actual signal lights themselves. And we have done that in the past. And what we're doing, we're trying to address those cables through the capital program, and not just the replacement of the cables, but through a replacement of everything, the relays, the stop mechanisms,
But those older cables amount to a significant proportion, am I right?
Generally about 40% of a project, yeah.
Let me take you to another question, if I may, please. There is some thought, I'm told, that the concept of computer-assisted track technology may be on its way to being or is already somewhat outdated, and the GPS technology as a braking mechanism and to reduce headway between trains may provide a better vehicle for that. Have you given any consideration to that?
I would say that that's something that's being looked at through the forum that's being put together, and so yeah, those opportunities are being explored at least.
And lastly, if I may, in terms of the medical teams that you are putting together on some of the stations, have you communicated with entities like Hatsola, which provide volunteer medical service in all boroughs of the city of New York, and who have gone out of their way to be helpful? May I recommend that if you have not done so, that you do so with dispatch?
Appreciate that. We'll look into that.
If there's no one else, then we're ready for the bus operations report. Mr. Vidal.
Thank you. Good morning. Today I will provide you with some details of the bus plan to support Long Island Railroad customers during Amtrak's summer service cuts at Penn Station. Specifically, we will be managing a new network of buses providing Long Island Railroad commuters supplemental service to Manhattan from 8 commuter parking lots in Long Island. Buses will run weekdays from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., dropping off passengers at 3 Midtown locations. They will make return trips from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., picking up passengers at 4 Midtown Manhattan locations on 34th Street and 42nd Street. We will cross-honor fares for all customers showing their valid monthly or weekly Long Island Railroad tickets. All buses will operate on HOV lanes on the Long Island Expressway, entering Manhattan via the Queens Midtown Tunnel. The New York State Police, MTA Police, and bridges and tunnel officers will work collaboratively with local law enforcement partners in New York City and on Long Island to keep designated lanes clear for buses while strictly enforcing HOV restrictions. In addition to supporting the Long Island Railroad, we will also be providing shuttle buses in support of the Myrtle Viaduct reconstruction project, which begins on July 1st and will replace aging infrastructure at the Fresh Pond Bridge and the Myrtle Viaduct. This project will affect M train service between Metropolitan Avenue and Myrtle Avenue at Broadway for 10 months beginning July 1st. I'm confident that we have great plans in place to manage both of these projects. Obviously, this will be an all-hands-on-deck summer for our bus operations team. Finally, as you know, at the last board meeting, many paratransit customers and advocates came out to voice their concerns about paratransit service. We have heard the concerns regarding the need for improved flexibility, reliability, and transparency loud and clear. The bottom line is that we recognize the current paratransit system is not working for many of our customers. At the board meeting on Wednesday, Steve Lopiano, Vice President of Paratransit, will present our strategies to provide a more customer-centric, transparent system with improved on-time performance, reduced ride times, and flexible trip booking and management. These strategies address some of the concerns we heard last month. Rides take too long, bookings must be made way in advance, rules are too rigid, payment options are limited, reimbursements are subject to delays, travel information is often inaccurate, and there are too many late pickups and no-shows. Steve will outline some of the immediate improvements to the broker and dedicated service that have already been implemented and other strategies we plan to implement by the end of the year. These include the launch of an e-hail and TNC pilot utilizing accessible and non-accessible vehicles, improvements to our existing AVLM system, and the launch of a new web-based app to provide greater booking flexibility and trip management. In addition, we plan to implement near-term improvements beyond 2017, such as replacement of the outdated AVLM system we currently use and the scheduling system. We encourage feedback from all of our stakeholders regarding these strategies and look forward to a dialogue that will help shape and improve our paratransit service. This completes the operations report.
And I presume there are questions on the bus operations report. Commissioner Trottenberg, Mr. Albert, Mr. Jones, Ms. Vanterpool, and Mr. Myrtle.
I just had a quick question. For the Access-A-Ride presentation, is there a handout? Will there be some paper that the board can review ahead of time?
The presentation will be distributed to the board members, I think, later today. Is that true?
Let me verify that, but we'll work on that.
Let me stress, as we've discussed in this, it would really be useful to have the paper before the meeting so the board members could review it and have intelligent questions to ask. So really, otherwise, I think the briefing will not be all that it could be.
10-4.
Steve, the 8 bus locations on Long Island, do you know the frequency of the buses at this point?
Well, we have a schedule with headways that we've developed for each of them. It'll be getting posted onto the MTA website. But yeah, there are headways, and I can share them with you.
Do you have an idea?
Well, it depends upon the
location.
The locations and all, yes, and the number of buses that we support.
In the case of the Valley Stream location, which is right at the railroad station, why would someone take one of the buses versus the train? And especially if that bus has to wend its way up to the LIE HOV lane from Valley Stream. That's, I mean, by that point, the train could have been in Hunters Point already, for that matter. So why would somebody take that bus?
Well, some people may choose to follow what you're saying, but the intent here is to provide options. And then as we roll this out, if the options aren't taken advantage of, then we'll reevaluate and reallocate. But you'll
be looking at those how frequently? Daily?
Oh, I would think, yes, at least daily, but, from a practical standpoint, we would want to have a real-time idea of who's using the service.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Jones?
I wanted to thank you for giving me some of the ideas on Accessoride. But one of the things I was concerned about from that short briefing was the issue of the demographics of who are the service population for Accessoride. I had no idea that it was tilted so heavily towards the elderly. Not all elderly, I'm older than some, but over 70% over 65.
Correct.
And such low ability to use the internet. So I hope as the presentation comes forward, we recognize how we're going to do something to mitigate the fact you're moving towards new technologies and you're dealing with a very old population who don't know how to use the internet. I don't want to set up a system that fits my daughter, and she's great at getting Ubers, and I let her do it, but which I struggle with, but I'm pretty literate. And I know this population could have some real difficulties unless we figure out how we make the interface better. You may have to have training before you do this.
So I think you'll be pleased, the systems that will be put in place will include, the ability to call into the existing command, scheduling center, but that will interface with the web-based, hopefully app that the people who are technologically sophisticated will be able to use.
Right.
But the intent is to not disenfranchise anybody, and particularly being aware of who our constituency is.
I do a lot of work with AARP, which is dealing with some of these same questions of how do you get retirees to actually use it might be an interesting collaboration because they've come up with smartphones and techniques to help people who have very limited understanding of technology to actually make use of it. It might be a collaboration you want to look at.
Agreed.
Point well taken.
I am very glad you're sticking to the schedule or the suggestion to give this presentation on Wednesday. Many of us who have had private conversations with you and your staff know that you've been doing a lot behind the scenes, and the public doesn't know that, which fuels their anger and frustration and impatience. So it's certainly a bit overdue to share the work that you're doing, because again, you have been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, so I'm really glad to see that move forward. You mentioned that you were going to, of course, be seeking and soliciting comments from the public. Is there going to be a mechanism, and if there is already one, I'm sorry I didn't know, but will there be a mechanism, or is there a mechanism to collect that feedback once you make this presentation on on Wednesday via the website, for example?
Sure. So part of the presentation will include a clarification for everybody as to what our current advocacy outreach is and all the efforts that we make now to communicate and how we're planning on expanding that. So and also the matrices so that everybody will be aware of what people's level of satisfaction is and what their issues are. So I think it is covered in the presentation, and I think. It really is just a baseline for us to build off of, and I think you'll be pleased to see that. It wasn't part of what we had originally shared with you, though.
And I have a different question. I'm a bit concerned with going back to the LIRR bus service plan, that cross-honoring will only be honored for those with a weekly or monthly ticket, because I would imagine many customers may opt to not purchase weekly and monthlies during that very stressful time and find other ways of getting around, maybe telecommuting, for example. Has any consideration been given toward a daily ticket, honoring a daily ticket?
There's been conversation on it, but at this stage of the game, it's from the best of my knowledge, we're just at the weekly and monthly. But there has been conversation on it.
That's the position now.
Before we go to Mr. Merdler, I just want to thank Ms. Vanterpool for acknowledging the behind-the-scenes work that has gone into trying to develop a response on Accessoride, up to and including all the days of this weekend. I speak from personal experience on that. We hope that at the end this will be responsive, but this is where the discussion belongs. Right here in this committee and at the board when we see the details of the plan, and you'll get that, I trust, before the board, because we all want to take a look at what's going on and have an opportunity to comment. But I think most importantly, the people who use this service, who have been profoundly unhappy over a long period of time, deserve an opportunity to see it, whether on our website or by virtue of coming to the meeting on Wednesday. And we hope that will begin a fruitful dialogue in getting this service changed once and for all.
Mr. Vidal, can you tell us whether there is or there are contemplated to be contraflow HOV lanes on the major expressways coming in from Long Island and going back in the evening peak to facilitate automobile and bus traffic?
So it was contemplated, but the determination was made that there wasn't a need for that.
Well, wait a minute. According to the statistics that I referred to earlier today, most of the bus service, and I'll give you a copy of it, most of the bus service will entail at least an hour of delay. If you have a contraflow path in and out of Long Island, that will clearly speed it. Why do you say there's no need for it?
Well,
the Long Island Railroad's the Long Island Expressway is a parking lot now.
If I may, Steve.
Yep.
So the HOV lane restrictions are being increased, right, from 2+ to 3+, and that's what's going to help mitigate that issue.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Thank you, Craig.
Is there anyone else? Okay. Then I think we're ready to go to the safety report. Cheryl Kennedy.
Okay. Turning to the first grid on safety performance, results were as follows. With the exception of fires, all items discussed refer to rates. Subway customer accidents had an increase when comparing the 12-month period of April 2016 through March 2017 with the prior 12 months, primarily due to slip, trip, fall incidents. Subway fires increased when comparing May 2016 through April 2017 with the prior 12-month period. 99.5% of the fires reported for the 12-month period were low or average severity. When analyzing bus performance, bus collisions, collision injuries, and customer accidents were up when comparing May 2016 through April 2017 with the prior 12-month period. Bus collisions and collision injuries were down on a monthly basis when comparing April 2017 to April 2016. Employee lost time accidents decreased when comparing May 2016 through April 2017 with the prior 12-month period. Turning to the second grid on leading indicators, bus operations is continuing to look at enhancements to their pilot programs, which will not hinder achievement of their goals. All projects are progressing along and are expected to meet their targets. That completes the safety report.
Are there any questions on the safety report? If there are none, then I'll ask Chief Joe Fox to make the crime report.
Good morning, all. Is it working?
Yes.
Good? Thank you, Freddie. Good morning, everyone. Total major felonies in transit are up 3.3% year-to-date, with 32 additional incidents through May. It's 1,002 crimes compared to 970 last year. There were 12 more felony assaults, up 10%, and 52 additional grand larceny incidents, up 8% year-to-date. Robberies remain down substantially this year, a 16% decline from last year, with 33 fewer incidents, 169 versus 202. Last year was our second lowest year in reported robberies. This year we're on pace to have our absolute lowest year in robberies. For the month of May, total major felonies showed no increase, with 209 incidents which was the same as May last year. There were 2 additional robberies in May, 41 versus 39, 3 additional larcenies, 136 versus 133, and 5 fewer felony assaults during the month, which is contrary to the trend that we've had this year with an increase. Now, total crimes, murder, rape, robbery, and assaults combined remained down year-to-date in transit with a 3% decline, 323 versus 333. 36% of our total major felonies year-to-date were committed in Manhattan, 29% in Brooklyn, 19% in the Bronx, and 14% in Queens. And that's pretty close to how it's been laying out in the last several years. The year-to-date number of major felonies per day increased from 6.4 per day last year to 6.6 through this year. And the number of robberies dropped from 1.3 last year to 1 robbery per day. So that difference between 6.4 crimes and 6.6, that 0.2 of a crime per day represents that 3% increase that we're looking to turn around. I want to share a recent arrest for a robbery that occurred on June 9th at Parsons Boulevard on the F train. 4 brazen young men assaulted a group of people in the station, removing cash from one of the subway riders before fleeing. Transit District 20 officers responded and apprehended one of the perpetrators, 19-year-old Jatis Leak. As Officer David Levy and Lieutenant Hukum Moore and others searched the area, they discovered Leak at a local car dealership. He fled but was apprehended after a brief foot pursuit. At the time of his arrest, Leak was in possession of more than $2,000 in counterfeit cash and a quantity of marijuana. Our investigation also revealed that he was sought in a pattern of robberies in Queens, including 2 gunpoint thefts from livery cab drivers. He was charged with additional counts of robbery in these incidents after each of the victims identified him during the lineups. He has 5 prior arrests, including 2 additional arrests for robbery, and is being held without bail pending his next court date. Of course, our detectives are actively investigating the unapprehended perpetrators as we seek to hold them accountable for their role in each of these incidents. But this arrest is just one example of the precision policing that Commissioner O'Neill speaks of when referring to our department's strong focus on the relatively small number of persistent offenders who are responsible for the bulk of our violent crimes within our subways and in our streets. Arrests like this and several other recent arrests over the past few weeks are reflective not just of our investigative efforts, but of our constant evaluation of where our officers are deployed within the transit system. The quick response and relentless follow-up by patrol officers achieved what we expected, stopping a pattern of robberies from continuing, and are among the reasons robberies are at an all-time low in transit. With that, I welcome any comments or questions or suggestions.
Mr. Merdler, then Mr. Jones.
As usual, I congratulate you and your colleagues in the Transit Bureau for a spectacular job.
Thank you.
On page 52 of the book, there are 2 numbers stated on January through May activity. One is total summonses, and then beneath that is total summonses TABs. Those are not duplications, those are additive, are they not?
Let me refer to that page, Chuck.
52 at the bottom.
Yeah, I have it transferred. May through May, total summonses.
Total summonses 34,000, TABs
right.
26.
So the tabs are the 2600 number, and Sergeant Paul Gratton's in the back. If I'm incorrect, please shout out. But the tabs are the 26,000 is the tabs, and then the additional about 8,000 are criminal court summonses.
The reason I'm asking you is we received, and I thank him for it, from Mr. Henley, a response to a question I put some weeks back as to what happens with the tabs being civil proceeding summonses issued to people who are fare beaters, jump the turnstiles or whatever. And as I understand those statistics, 48% of the people who get those summonses do not honor them, do not respond, are among the missing. Correct me if I am wrong in 2 other respects. One, it is a civil proceeding and therefore no bench warrant or other follow-up can occur. Am I correct on that? Number two, that there is no way of measuring recidivism in that context. Am I correct?
Jim, may I? I'm sorry. Because I think because I had a separate email with Chuck. I think because he had asked me a question as whether we can, whether any of these are recidivists, and the answer to that is if they were recidivists, they wouldn't have been given the tab. That's that small number that are arrested. So this population of people who get tab summonses are people who are not recidivists.
So when your officers find somebody fare beating, and it looks like almost 50% of the fare beaters just ignore the summonses. When your officers give it, how do they know that the person didn't beat the fare last week?
Well, they check with that. Well, you mean, how do we know they weren't given a tab for beating the fare last week? When a subject reaches a certain category that makes them a transit recidivist, they're entered in a list, a database, and the officers check that database. And if it pops as a recidivist, then they don't give the tab. And the recidivist, I'm sorry, I just want to, that definition of what a transit recidivist is something that I changed a few years ago working with the MTA, where we considerably lowered that number, that population. So whatever the indicators are to make you a recidivist are much more recent, such as an arrest in transit in the last several years for sex crimes or for misdemeanor or assault, and a number of tab summonses received in a year or 1 or 2 year period. So once they check the name, if they come up as a recidivist, then they will take them through as an arrest. But to answer your question about a week before, we work closely with Marianne Maloney, but what happens is that pool of who the recidivists are is changing on a weekly or daily basis, because as that window of that time frame of, the last couple of years to be arrested so many times, or the last few years, as that changes, so new people are added and other people are taken off. And I don't know whether if it was a week prior, whether the turnaround would be that quick, but we can get back to you.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Your folks, before they will issue a summons for a fare beater, will have done some form of checking to make sure that he or she has not previously been a fare beater.
Right.
My question then on the civil side is 48% of people ignoring the summonses is an astronomically high number. What steps are being taken on the civil side or otherwise to deal with that?
There are a number of efforts made by the Transit Adjudication Bureau to address collection of summonses where they've fallen into default, as the data indicated that we provided to the committee, and that was taken as of April for 2016 summonses, and collection efforts are ongoing. But a little over half of the summonses for fare evasion have been disposed of or collected by April of the next year. Those efforts to collect continue. There's a whole series of efforts that go into it. The first step after the initial 90 days, in that period there's steps two. There's a contacting the respondent, attempts to contact them and get them to pay. After 90 days, these are entered with the clerks as civil judgments in the county clerk's office, and then there's a whole series of further collection efforts that go on that involve efforts ranging from the marshal, efforts ranging including a collection agency, and then pursuant to state law also efforts for those respondents who are filers of income taxes and may have refunds, efforts to get offsets under the statewide offset program, which has recently been producing very great returns. So there's a whole series of collection efforts that's undertaken by the Transit Adjudication Bureau, which is headed by Ms. Maloney, as mentioned. And we are working on continued improvements in those collection efforts, and we will be responding to your inquiry that you made at the end of
I would like that.
And if I may add, we also, because it's incumbent on us to give them a healthy document, the summons itself, so it has to be prepared properly. And we constantly work with Mary Ann to ensure the highest quality, that they have their information that they need for the summons. And we also do our own self-audits, and what we find is that our tab dismissal rate is based on inaccurate summons. Preparation is very low, and the officer error rate is low, but this conversation will certainly cause me to go back and renew those efforts and make sure they stay that way.
May I, Mr. Chairman, one other question?
Sure.
You've indicated an astronomically high number of hate crime incidents, increased from 19 to 19 from 1. I look, for example, at Transit District number 30, which seems to have the largest number of them. Where is that?
It must have been timed out. That's in Brooklyn, in central. Thank you, sir. In central Brooklyn, and those numbers, the hate crimes, and I think Freddie had asked for this, and we put this in the report, Mr. Farrar. Our grand total in 2017 is 32 compared to 14 last year, and the majority of those, a good bulk of those, 19 are anti-Semitic. And it was only 1 last year, so I think that's the number you're looking at, the 19 versus 1, which is the bigger number. And typically, those are when I say not violent acts, there's absolutely no place for drawing of a swastika anywhere, whether, as I had said here before, whether it's the size of a quarter or the size of a subway car door. But that's the bulk of those crimes.
The bulk of those graffiti type?
Yes, and you know, there's no. It was suggested to me in another forum to possibly hand out with our crime prevention tips and literature that we hand out to thousands of people every day, to put out something that's illegal. In this case, I don't think there's anything we need to do. Anyone doing that has a pretty good idea what it means and what it represents, and there are many people, as we all know, who travel our subways who lived through that horror, and their family members did. So it's something we take very seriously. Every single one is fully investigated, and we encourage people, if they see them, because a number of these were reported to us by a writer. They take a photo and send it to us. And in one case, when we went back, it had already been cleaned up by somebody who wasn't MTA, and it wasn't us. It was somebody who thought enough of how horrible that is that they cleaned it themselves. So we encourage people to report these when they see them.
In fact, many of the members of the writing public have gone to great pains to erase these as they see them on the train. My last question, if I may. To what extent...
Mr. Merdler, can we... Mr. Jones has been waiting very patiently. We'll come back to you.
I'll cede my... Let Mr. Merdler.
Oh, okay.
That's fine.
If I may, is, do you believe that if we were able to put together a reward for the capture of the folks who did this, that would have a beneficial impact?
I'm not sure of the financial implications or the process and how we do that. I know we put out rewards.
Private sector.
I know we put out rewards through our Crime Stoppers, and that's a decision that usually Chief Boyce makes, but I will take it under consideration and get back to you, like what that process would be and feasibility.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Chief Fox for meeting with me, and I think a very constructive meeting on my concern about fare evasion arrests. I think one of the things I'd like to raise, however, is what is the fine for someone involved in fare evasion?
I believe it's $100.
And if they can't pay $275, now you hit them with $100.
Well, is there some type of a payment plan in some cases? This is not only administered by me.
I think
don't mean to be
perhaps rhetorically, you know, at least our preliminary understanding is this is a crime of poverty, that 90% are black and Latinos, that they're mostly young men, many of them going to work or not going or to school, and the notion of vigorous collection proceedings that further damage credit and ability to enter the workforce seems counterproductive. That's a personal view, but I am concerned because of the demographics of this, that virtually no one on the 2nd Avenue subway is getting caught for fare evasion, but huge numbers of Black and Latino poor people are being swept up into this. So this is more rhetorical. I am very interested in what we can do to take preventative steps so people don't even get into this whole morass that many of them, having been 17 at one point, aren't even aware of how damaging this can be. And that's why I've talked about, let's put signage, let's do everything we can to prevent particularly young people from making this mistake.
And while Jim keys up his mic, Mr. Jones, I actually thank you for recognizing our meetings, because I was actually debating whether to put that in my remarks, because we had, and you answered the question, I should have. But we had a great conversation 2 months ago, and then a couple of weeks ago, and your staff was incredibly kind and professional, and there's more to come. But I just want to, I wasn't definitive with the numbers when we met, but I just want to tell you since then, the highest number of people that wind up getting arrested are actually not 17 to 24, they're 24 to 35. But this 17 to 24 is a big number. It's not too many percentages is off. And just for the, it's been a number of months since I've discussed the fare evasion issues. Is that it's just a thumbnail for everyone here that, you know, Mr. Jones and I, David, had so many really good conversations. The 3 out of 4 people who stopped for fare evasion are given a tab summons. It's 1 out of 4 that are arrested, and out of that 1 out of 4, actually 1 out of 5 of the total number actually goes to central booking. A good number of those 25% get a desk appearance ticket, which is a 2-hour process at the district. And the reason that they wind up getting arrested is because they've already had prior exposure to the criminal justice system or the transit adjudication bureau. So the bulk number of people are getting summons. It's just that small number, and that number has been going down consistently. And I think we're down about 15% this year, those number arrested. And in part, that's because of more deployment in the last year with visibility and on train patrols. And as far as the deployment, we never send people out to do theft of service operations primarily. We never put out theft of service teams, deployment. We put people out in our busiest stations based on ridership and crime and factors such as those. So we wind up with the highest number of stations that we had discussed, the top 10, and one of them, the top one, is 42nd Street, 116th Street, 14th Street, Union Square, 3rd Avenue, Utica Avenue, Crown Heights, and so a number of them are in Manhattan, which I believe, I'm appreciative that we actually did that hand search to get you that, because it reinforces for me that we put people in these busiest stations based on crime and, you know, numbers of riders and the gain of having visibility of uniformed officers where there's most people. And what happens there is if they see somebody jump a turnstile, they take appropriate action. But thank you. Thank you, David.
Keith, Mr. Vidiello.
Chief, a question for you. I've had the fortunate or unfortunate experience, depending on you measure it, across my life, to have been pulled over once or twice and being given a written warning, actually, in some places upstate and elsewhere. That my impression is went into a database so that if I got pulled over again, I would get the actual ticket and fine. Do your officers have in their sort of arsenal of tools before the tab summons, is there a way for them to give a warning that is also tracked so that they would know if the person or other officers would know if they had committed an act of fare evasion again, but doesn't rise to the level of all the things that Mr. Jones is appropriately worried about and impacts their life by, even if it's just a tab summons?
It's a great point and great question, and I know some other agencies throughout the country have written warnings. We never had in the NYPD. It's of course something that I could bring back to my higher command and discuss. But what we do have is the absolute tool of discretion. And police officers, we actually have mechanisms in place since I became the chief of transit, so that I require my commanding officers to know when an elderly person or a young child is the subject of law enforcement. They actually have mechanisms where they do quality control to check this, to know when in a case of if there were a case of an officer who tends to only find people with outside our city addresses, meaning tourists, and we don't find that, but I insist that we have measures to look for that. So if an officer sees someone who's confused, other factors that I can't think of right now, they have the absolute right to give somebody a warning. And I've actually, I shared with Mr. Jones in our chat, showing someone around my office looking at the Gentech cameras, and I saw a guy who was asking people for swipes, which is a violation, and he happened to be doing it in a way where he wasn't like right on people as they're going through the turnstile. He had a kind of respect about him where he was stepping back, and then you could see he was asking. There's no audio, but you can tell he was asking like from several feet away. I actually witnessed an officer get off the train, he must have seen this, and walked out from the car and let this guy in. So we absolutely expect them to show common sense when they're out there with certain violations.
I guess I would suggest maybe it's worth considering a more formalized warning process as we try and strike this very, very delicate balance of empathy and not ruining people's lives or doing something counterproductive long term. Because I think it may be more than just the discretionary act. If somebody were given a formal warning and explained, now you are in here, and in a certain period of time, if you see you committing fare evasion again, you will get the tab summons. It may be powerful and may achieve a little more balance to what we're talking about here. But of course, we'll leave that ultimate decision to you.
I've been emphasizing discretion and common sense enforcement since I became the chief of transit, and that was not only supported and echoed by Commissioner Bratton, and it is now by Commissioner O'Neill. It's many changes that we've made and continue to look at. Thank you, Mr. Vitello.
Mr. Albert.
Yeah, Chief, I also congratulate you on the job you're doing. While I think it's important to have signage warning people of the consequences of fare evasion, I don't believe we should be looking the other way on fare evasion. As we have seen from report after report, people sometimes who beat the fare have either loaded weapons on them or far more serious crimes, and if we can keep them out of the system at the turnstile, I think that's a great thing. I see people lately waiting at slam gates, waiting for people to exit so that they can go in. I've seen people backcocking. These are not what you would describe as poor people either. These are just people who know they can beat the system. And I think it's important to send a message that, there are consequences. For those that care about our poor customers, letting fare evasion continue is the quickest way to a more massive fare hike than not doing it. So, I think it's an insult to poor people to say you're not smart enough or you can't do the right thing where the transit system is concerned. I wouldn't want to insult them that way. The turnstile doesn't know the economic or the race or anything of the people that jump it, but it is a threat to the system, and I think it has to be treated that way.
Mr. Albert, I actually, in some of our discussions lately have been like, what the reporting mechanism other than what a cop sees with the, I think, David, we discussed that with the MTA's role, and I did a little more research into that, but as a board member, you've emailed me a number of times where you see this, and that just brings me to the point that, it sets to see that happen rampantly sets a tone of disorder. So the enforcement of people who would do that, or the stopping the behavior or correcting the behavior, is something that's critical to people feel like they have an orderly subway experience.
Chief, at the last fair, the group of fair hearings at the Brooklyn one, there was a lady in tears saying she sees people boarding through the rear door on her bus route on a daily basis, and she says, I think to myself, why should I have to pay if they don't pay?
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Now we're ready for Subway Finance Report and Craig Cipriano.
Thank you. Preliminary April 2017 New York City Transit farebox revenue of $368.3 million was $1.4 million or 0.4% below budget. Year-to-date revenue was $1,430.7 million, $23.3 million or 1.6% below budget due to a negative ridership trend as well as adverse weather during the first quarter. Preliminary April 2017 New York City Transit operating expenses were below budget by $35.6 million or 5.7%. Labor expenses underran budget by $22.2 million or 4.7%, caused mostly by lower health and welfare, OPEB current expenses, resulting from lower rates and vacancies, as well as the favorable timing of expenses. Non-labor expenses were also under budget by $13.4 million or 8.7%, including favorable results reported in most accounts. Year-to-date operating expenses were less than budget by $63.6 million or 2.4%, including lower net labor costs of $34.8 million, 1.7%, and non-labor account underruns of $28.8 million or 4.7%, with again most accounts reporting favorable results. April 2017 New York City Transit ridership totaled 193.8 million or 1.1% below budget. April 2017 New York City Transit average weekday ridership results compared to 2016 were as follows. Average weekday subway ridership was 5.7 million, a decrease of 1.1%. Average weekday local bus ridership was 1.9 million, a decrease of 7.7%. Express bus ridership was 40,000, a decrease of 2%, and paratransit ridership was 28,000, a decrease of 1.5%. Preliminary May 2017 farebox revenue of $390.1 million was $8.6 million, or 2.2% below budget. Preliminary May 2017 operating expense results were favorable to budget by $4 million, or 0.6%. That concludes my report.
Thank you. There any questions on that? If there are none, I'll ask Steve Vidal to do the bus finance report.
Thank you. April 2017 year-to-date preliminary farebox revenue was $66.4 million, or 6.2% below budget. MTA bus year-to-date non-reimbursable expenses were below budget by $5.9 million, or 2.5%. Labor expenses exceeded budget by $3.7 million, or 2.1%, primarily due to the timing of reimbursable projects and interagency billings, higher running times and traffic expenses, vacancies, and availability. Non-labor expenses were under budget by $9.6 million, or 15.3%, primarily due to the timing of maintenance contracts. On ridership, MTA bus preliminary ridership for April 2017 was 9.9 million, or 1.3% below budget. The 12-month rolling average through April 2017 showed a decline of 1.2% in weekday ridership and remained the same for weekend ridership as compared to the prior year. This concludes the MTA bus finance and ridership report.
Thank you. Are there any questions on bus finance? If there are none, John O'Grady will make the capital program report.
Good morning. Capital program results. Commitments during April 2017 totaled $1.021 billion. This included the Canarsie Tunnel rehabilitation and coordinated improvements. Some of those improvements also include ADA enhancements at First Avenue and at Bedford Avenue stations. That's in addition to the tunnel work itself. Package number 2 of what is referred to as the Enhanced Station Initiative for improvements at Broadway, 30th, 36th, and 39th Avenue stations on the Astoria lines in Queens. Purchase of 110 compressed natural gas articulated buses for services on high-capacity routes system-wide. Completions during the month of April total $55 million. This included replacement of mainline track switches on the 6th Avenue line in Brooklyn as part of the track and switch program. Rehabilitation of pumps at 4 locations on the Pelham and Jerome lines in the Bronx and on the Lenox line in Manhattan. That concludes the capital program report.
Thank you. Mr. Albert.
John, why is it referred to, when you have all the other lines listed by name, why is it referred to as the 6th Avenue line in Brooklyn rather than the Culver line, for instance?
I'm sorry, I stand corrected. It's the Culver line in Brooklyn. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Then I'll ask Steve Plachaki to make the procurements report.
Good morning. The procurement package, which presents New York City Transit, MTA Bus Company, and MTACC procurements, includes 8 actions totaling $78.5 million in expenditures. I would like to highlight 2 procurement actions included in this month's agenda. The first item is a 5-year competitively solicited and negotiated contract with WSP USA Incorporated, formerly Parsons Brinckerhoff Incorporated, to provide worldwide technical inspection services in the estimated amount of $40.1 million. New York City Transit requires a consultant to perform in-plant inspections of materials throughout the world before those materials are shipped, and to supply inspections with multidisciplinary expertise that is not available in-house and who are required to travel throughout the United States and abroad. The inspections are required to ensure that materials and supplies purchased by New York City Transit, as well as those provided to contractors for capital projects, adhere to New York City Transit specifications. In addition to in-plant inspections, WSP will develop inspection protocols, which are detailed scripts for determining whether materials comply with the specification requirements, perform quality audits of production processes, and prepare reports documenting and detailing compliance or non-compliance with material specifications. The types of materials inspected under this contract include safety-sensitive materials and equipment such as specially fabricated track work materials, rails, railroad ties, and related products, structural steel and other fabricated steel pieces, electrical products, signal and communications equipment, paints and chemicals, and other miscellaneous materials. Prior to advertising the RFP, the procurement team engaged in an extensive outreach effort to engineering firms, inspection firms, and nationally recognized testing laboratories. The RFP was advertised in August 2016. 14 firms obtained the solicitation, and 12 firms attended the pre-proposal conference. In October 2016, proposals were received from 4 firms. Following oral presentations, Advisian and WSP were invited to negotiations. After the completion of negotiations, best and final offers were requested and received from both firms. After reviewing the best and final offers, the selection committee unanimously recommended WSP for award. The selection committee unanimously found WSP to be the highest technically ranked proposer because of superior relevant experience of its assigned personnel in providing material inspections and in providing quality and technical audit services, its depth of resources to perform inspections, its project management team, and its mastery of the scope of work. In addition, WSP also submitted the lowest price best and final offer, and its pricing was determined to be fair and reasonable. The second action is the award of a 24-month test and evaluation contract to Michelin North America Incorporated for the leasing and servicing of tires on revenue vehicles in the estimated amount of $2.5 million. Back in March 2016, the board was informed of New York City Transit's intention of embarking on an extensive test and evaluation of tire alternatives to our current primary contractor, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. As part of a broader plan to enhance competition on the upcoming tire leasing procurement scheduled to take place in 2018 with award in 2019, a test and evaluation agreement offers advantages to both New York City Transit and Michelin. First, it allows the Department of Buses to evaluate alternate products available in the industry on a trial basis to test and analyze performance characteristics, while at the same time enhancing New York City Transit's opportunity to promote competition. Second, it will give Michelin actual operational experience, resulting in the ability to offer a better informed proposal in response to the upcoming RFP. Under this contract, Michelin will replace Goodyear for leasing and servicing tires at 2 depots, Castleton in Staten Island and Mother Clara Hale in Manhattan. These locations were strategically selected because, in combination, they operate a wide cross-section of the bus fleet, including low-floor 40-foot buses, articulated buses, and high-floor over-the-road buses. This allows for the testing of a breadth of products, including standard and traction tires. Traction tires are composed of a softer rubber compound than a standard transit tire and are produced with a tread pattern designed to have large contact patch with the road in snow conditions, thus providing more traction than a standard transit tire in such conditions. The length of the agreement will allow for the evaluation of tires over full 2 winter seasons prior to the upcoming RFP scheduled to be awarded in 2019. The pricing offered by Michelin for the evaluation period is lower than the current pricing on the Goodyear contract and is considered fair and reasonable. I request your approval of all items in the agenda.
May I have a motion and second before questions and comments? Mr. Merdler, then anyone else? Questions and comments? Mr. Merdler.
I'm particularly focused on the WSP USA Consultant Construction Management Contract. I will hand up to you later two subsequent SAIs which are not indicated, one by the Justice Department in 2016 and one reported in 2017 by the Washington Post. You might want to note them. The reason I focus on it is the following. Can you recall a recent occurrence, last 5 years, where an SIA was indicated, namely that a vendor had committed or been charged with a serious crime like bribery, false statements, and the like, where we did not, through the existing mechanism and the existing rules, override that problem and go ahead with the contract?
Are you saying where we did override it or did not?
Where we did not.
Not to my knowledge, and I will. Let me just comment. In most instances, the MTA as a whole has taken on the approach of being a rehabilitative organization when it comes to organizations that have certain offenses, whether it be DBE, Foreign Corruption Act, or other issues the like. In many instances, when we find a company that has certain wrongdoing, we call them in for a responsibility hearing. We make sure that they have a corrective action plan, and in many instances, we impose a monitor to make sure that any of the wrongdoings or issues that were raised in that particular issue are monitored and reported upon.
As the SEC and the Justice Department pointed out in one case that I noted earlier, in some of these companies, the cost of bribery, the cost of corruption, the cost of false statements is part of the cost of doing business. I view our problem as being getting honest days' work, honest days' pay, and automatically to override these kind of constant criminal conduct, and there are many of them that have, and I'll give you a list one after the other. You've seen them in my comments from the past, I think is inappropriate. I renew the point that both Mr. Zuckerman and I made previously. We need to try and figure out some accommodative Vendex system for this agency as the City of New York has effectively deployed in the City of New York procurements.
I would like to comment to the latter comment. We at MTA do have a comprehensive compendium of issues that have been brought up through our deep research and vendor performance analysis on each of the contracts. Certainly we're always willing to look at information that's available in the public domain, but we do quite a robust background check on these contractors. But the ACE program that we have in place at MTA does keep and compile this information, and it is available to all of the procurement folks, and we have a process where they can go and cross-vet this information.
I'm not faulting the robust nature of what you do. I know you do it. My issue is that we cannot encourage, by letting it go dismissed, companies that engage in bribery as a way of doing business, in price fixing as a way of doing business. We need to take some hard look at trying to figure this out. My point was, you couldn't recall, and I couldn't over a 7-year period, where one of these wasn't automatically overridden.
I have a pretty good memory, but I will definitely go and check and see whether or not we have any of those.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, and I don't know what the materiality requirement would be, but shouldn't, at least for larger of these contracts, the board be aware of these kinds of issues that have been charged against a company? If there is a pattern of bribery going on with a particular vendor, I know we want to rehabilitate them. I wish we would rehabilitate some of the fare evasion, but I think if we're going to rehabilitate some of the largest corporations in the world, I think the board may want to know about that and your decision or the staff's decision of why that rehabilitation is appropriate.
I agree 100%. As a matter of fact, as a result and byproduct of issues that were raised by board members, all board members receive background information as requested by Commissioner Merdler in the past on your director's desk product. In addition, I will tell you, while the question was asked, do I recall, I can tell you assuredly that we have debarred and found companies non-responsible for performance in the past. I don't want, by any stretch of the imagination, anyone here to believe that we don't find companies non-responsible and debar them. We absolutely do, and we have. You asked whether or not I remember it happening as a result of a board action, and that's the issue. And I will go back and check as indicated.
Is there anyone else? There is a motion and second on the floor. May I have a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Procurements carry. Thank you. Now for service changes, Peter Caffiero and Mark Holmes.
Thank you. For New York City Transit this month, we have 3 staff summaries for your information. The first one is a proposal for a 1.5-mile extension of the southern end of the M1 bus route, as some of the public speakers referred to. Lower Manhattan has limited bus options for north-south travel, largely related to the street grid in that part of the city. Customers traveling northbound in Greenwich Village, Soho, Chinatown, and other neighborhoods only have options on 6th Avenue and currently on the east side on Bowery, 3rd Avenue. And that's approximately 1.5 miles apart. Extending the M1 route south along Broadway to Worth Street will address this gap. On Worth Street, it would then return back north on Center and Lafayette Streets. Every other M1 trip will be extended on weekdays from about 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., and every M1 trip will be extended on weekends. However, there's a long-term New York City reconstruction project currently underway on Worth Street, which makes operating along that street in this stretch not feasible for the M1. This is a utility reconstruction project. So as an interim measure, we are proposing to extend the M1 initially to Grand Street. We investigated a number of alternative locations, and this was the one that appeared the most feasible. It's anticipated that the Worth Street reconstruction project will be completed in late 2018, at which time we will extend the M1 as detailed in the staff summary to Worth Street. Our next staff summary, we're presenting 42 bus schedule changes on 37 routes that have been identified for proposed changes in service levels and/or running times for the September 2017 bus pick. To ensure that bus schedules accurately match current rider demand and operating conditions, and that New York City Transit has the resources available where they are needed, schedules are regularly reviewed, evaluated, and revised to provide passengers with the most efficient and effective service possible. 21 of the 42 bus schedule changes reduce service frequencies to more closely align service with customer demand and meet established bus loading guidelines. However, these savings will be reinvested into 16 bus schedule changes which increase service frequency to meet MTA loading guidelines for bus operation, and 5 bus schedule changes which modify running times to improve reliability using information from the latest available traffic conditions. Most of these changes reflect slower traffic speeds. Finally, in collaborative effort with the New York City Department of Transportation, we will be launching select bus service on the BX6 in the Bronx in the fall of 2017. This will be our 15th select bus service route on our 14th corridor. The BX6 is a critical east-west connection across the South Bronx and Upper Manhattan, serving 24,000 daily riders. The BX6 connects the dense neighborhoods of Hunts Point, Melrose, and Washington Heights. It serves as an important subway feeder to numerous north-south routes, and in addition it serves Yankee Stadium, the Bronx courthouses, and the Hunts Point food markets. As with our other SBS routes, the BX6 will include off-board fare collection, specially branded buses for all-door boarding, and real-time bus arrival information at the majority of the SBS stops. Also, as part of this year's BX6 SBS implementation, our partners at New York City DOT will install bus lanes on 161st Street and 163rd Street in the Bronx, so the BX6 avoids traffic congestion. New York City DOT will also build bus boarding islands on 161st Street at Sherman Avenue to improve ADA accessibility at these BX6 bus stops. The BX6 SBS will follow the same route path generally as the BX6 local, stopping at designated SBS stations. The BX6 local will continue to operate alongside the select bus service BX6, and both buses will operate at all times with combined increased frequencies. I will now turn this presentation over to Mark to talk about the MTA bus service changes.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning. MTA Bus has one item for the committee's information, which is a travel path revision at the Forest Hills terminus of the Q23, QM12, and QM42. As part of the changes to improve traffic flow along Woodhaven Boulevard for select bus service, the New York City Department of Transportation will be prohibiting the left turn from southbound Woodhaven Boulevard to eastbound Union Turnpike. To accommodate this change, we are revising the one-way loop made at the end of the aforementioned routes. Bus stops will be relocated nearby to the opposite sides of the streets affected. To facilitate this change, New York City DOT is working closely with MTA Bus in designing and constructing a new terminal area which will allow for safe and efficient operations while continuing to serve the residents of the nearby Crescent Apartments. This concludes the service change section of the agenda.
Thank you, gentlemen. I know for questions and comments, Mr. Albert had his hand first. Ms. Vanderpool, anyone else?
I think the M1 and the BX6 are laudatory improvements. I'm sure, Peter, you can anticipate what I'm about to say about the seasonal bus adjustments. In particular, to reduce the frequency of the M79 SBS when it's only been an SBS since May 21st. I mean, don't you usually get much more time before you make decisions like that? It's only been an SBS for a few weeks now.
In fact, we do. There's confusion, and we contributed to that. We actually have two SBS 79 routes, one in Staten Island and one now in Manhattan. And we had an internal designation of, I think, one SBS and one SBM or something like that. And that did not get caught by me to clarify that. So this is a actually minor adjustment on the select bus service 79 in Staten Island, which in fact is actually shifting some trips. So we're actually adding service at some points of the day.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you for that. I was wondering after the buildup of the M79 SBS. Our early signs on the M79 SBS is that it's doing very well. Great. Thank you.
Ms. Vanderpool.
With regards to the 21 service reductions, in March, you gave a presentation explaining some of the measures that you all were taking as a department to address bus delays and increase or reduce frequency, etc. Why would we implement service reductions before those measures have even been fully implemented? And in that vein, if we can get an update on the new fare payment system and also the timeline for some of the measures that you did discuss in March, which is something that I had asked post that conversation. And I asked this because, as you've pointed out and is also written in the book, these service reductions are being implemented due largely to traffic congestion. And many of the measures that you've proposed are to address traffic congestion. So I think it's very hasty for us to vote on these service reductions before any of the measures that you've implemented are even put into place. And lastly, if there's a way that we might split this action, Mr. Chairman, into two, because I wouldn't want to vote against the increase in service, but I'm not supportive of the decrease at this time.
I don't believe, Ms. Vanderpool, that these are anything other than information items.
is correct. These are for information. They are within our service change process, where these are relatively minor adjustments. I would point out, though, that whether or not it's a major or minor, these are in fact very integrally linked. We could not make the adjustments without the increases without reallocating resources as we are doing, not just financially but also in terms of vehicles. I can assure you that the vehicles saved on these reductions are being reinvested in routes where ridership is growing, or on routes where the travel speeds are slowing, but we need to maintain the level of service that we have there. And that being said, as we outlined in March, we are continuing to work both ourselves but also closely in partnership with New York City DOT to try to tackle the larger issues. We did, on our side, but also working with the city, talk about a proposal for looking at Staten Island bus service, express bus service, to try to address some of the issues in traffic congestion, among other things there. The BX6 that was talked about today, the SBS6, is a continuing rollout of our select bus service process, which has been very successful in trying to get at least those major routes operating better. But we continue to, we've only begun to scratch the surface on what we can do. In particular, I think working with New York City, we'll concentrate on those parts of the city where congestion has been the biggest problem, and that is Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, and the inner parts of Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx that are closest to Manhattan.
I'm worried about this cycle of declining ridership, declining service, and I know that is that's a key priority for you and for your team. Page 65 of our book is the ridership stats, and it shows that for weekday, every single mode in the New York City transit system is showing declining ridership. However, on the weekdays, bridges and tunnels are seeing an increase in vehicles. That is absolutely the wrong trend that we want to see, despite the fact that bridges and tunnels supports transit significantly, and we recognize that, and I recognize that. But I think that we should be increasing service across our bus system overall in a very counterintuitive approach, right? From a cost perspective, it seems as if, why would we be increasing service when we're losing ridership? But then we also know we're losing ridership in many cases because one factor is in reduced frequency. And we don't want to feed this cycle. And I think while I certainly understand the 16 service enhancements cannot be implemented without some of these reductions, perhaps we should hold for a bit until some of the measures are taking root and we're able to see some of the success before we decide on the package. Because I'm very concerned about this cycle. How do we get out of this cycle?
So, I would just add that the presentation that we did, I think in March, was it? We talked about a number of contributory factors around declining ridership. Traffic congestion may be a part of it, but it's not the only thing. Demographic change, I think that we also talked about routes that overlap subways that have what I would call organic declines. And we have to respond to that. And we have to respond to that in a very responsible way, in a deliberate way, and make immediate investments on service that is really needed on other routes. Remember, the bus network is 300 routes strong. And it's a very difficult and delicate balance as you allocate resources. So I think what Peter's doing in what we call a cycle is doing the normal management cycle, reviewing puts and adds and puts, and this is ongoing. It's part of the organic scheduling process.
And I think that's great. In fact, I think not doing these examinations would be suboptimal. I think it's important that you have this built into your processes, these mechanisms to reevaluate the routes. In fact, if if you're not reevaluating them, we don't know where the best use of resources is. I think the crux of my point is, why are we doing this right now at the same time that you've unveiled a plan to address a lot of these issues? Let's see how those measures take root, many of which we don't frankly know yet what the timeline for some of that is, right? So why can't we just hold this examination or hold these changes until we get a better sense? That's the crux.
When this issue has come up several times in the last few years, I have asked, why don't we do a demonstration on one route where we have seen ridership declines? Give, much better service, track if there's a construction project on that route or something that would inhibit throughput. Just do something to show that ridership can be declined on a route where it can be reversed on a route where it has declined. And I still ask for that demo on some route that Mr. Caffiero deems appropriate for such a demonstration, and see what happens.
Ms. Vanderpool?
And if it got lost in our discussion, but if there's an update on the new fare payment system, might we hear it?
I think that maybe we'll do that at another point, maybe next month, if we can, gather some information.
So we'll be responsive.
Okay. Then I'll ask President Dyrek to make special and standard follow-up reports.
Okay, thank you. This month, under our standard follow-up report section, we are providing a quarterly update on recidivism on the transit system. This report provides detailed information on recidivist arrest data and also notes steps we've undertaken, working in conjunction with the various district attorney offices to address recidivist crime on the system. Completes the report.
Okay. Questions on that? If there are none, for his first presentation to this committee, our new Chief Development Officer, in whose portfolio MTACC falls, General Lieber.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your courtesy and support in helping to onboard me. And I also want to thank my transit colleagues. And what MTACC does in individual projects, to a great extent, involves cooperation with operating agencies who are our customers, although obviously the riders are ultimately the customers. But for a development organization, the owner, the entity that's going to operate, is the customer. And we're, I think, doing a reasonably good job getting started on building bridges so that we can be more effective together. So I thank you. I will be brief because I know time is short, reporting on the Cortlandt Street Station project and the second phase of 2nd Avenue. Cortlandt Street, I was aware of this project in my prior role at the World Trade Center, and I was especially aware of the hangover that, from a budget and schedule standpoint, that came out of the transfer of the project from the Port Authority to the MTA. But I've spent a little time on it, and I think that at this point the arrangement with the contractor has stabilized, and that we have a tentative agreement that the project will be delivered substantially complete in December of 2018, with some caveats that are still remaining to be worked out, but we've moved a long way to reducing and eliminating those caveats so that there is more certainty. To that end, we are working with the contractor and our transit colleagues to make sure that both the pace and the quality of the submittals is adequate to support that schedule. That's a very important component of the development process, in this case in particular. The other variable is, I think, keeping the community aware, because this project is one that folks who live downtown have been counting on for some time. And our project executive provided an update to the community board in the last few days. So that project is Cortlandt Street, number online station. I didn't mention number 7, but I think that project is on a reasonably solid trajectory. The construction of the remaining work, the secondary entrance to the 34th Street Hudson Yard Station, is, as I said, progressing well. Structural work completed, systems installation and finishes work below grade, ongoing right now, and the contract is forecast to be completed by the end of the 3rd quarter, that is to say September of 2018. Second Avenue Subway Phase 2. The project continues to perform its environmental review, which is projected to be completed in the spring sometime. We're still working with the exact date because it involves, obviously, reviewing authorities, but the environmental review is ongoing and shooting for that completion schedule. And as part of that, we're addressing critical design issues, such as determining the depth of the 125th Street station, which is important obviously for engineering reasons, to optimize the alignment and honestly to balance issues of constructability with impacts above grade to people in the neighborhood. So that is an issue that is being worked through as part of the preliminary engineering. And we are on track to open within the next few days. The date is still, the exact date is being set, the Community Information Center for Phase 2, which is mirroring what was a very successful outreach effort that was undertaken with respect to Phase 1. So we're getting that started to get people prepared, to give people information, and it had the ancillary benefit of getting, I think, a lot of people in the community involved in that project, the first phase, that is, in a positive way. We're hoping to reproduce that on Phase 2 of this project. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Comments? Hearing none, that concludes the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor? Thank you. We are adjourned.